All right, so we are back for our Torah Tuesdays at 2, and we're going to be looking at this week's Torah portion, a fun double Torah portion, Achrei Mot Kiddushim. So we have, sorry, I'm just hiding. We have pretty much a lot of the holiness code is really what we're looking at, and so we have two instances of this holiness code. One in chapter 18 and the other in chapter 20. This is some of the most challenging parts of the Torah for many people today. We actually read from this on Yom Kippur afternoon, and there are many communities that choose to read an alternative reading because so many people find it offensive. We're going to see why people may find it offensive. My approach is, however, not to ignore something or try to silence it and put it in a box and push it aside, but rather to kind of wrestle with it and struggle with it and see if we can come to a new relationship with it. So that's what we've got going on today. So I've got the text is actually there on the website. However, I'm going to screen share. So I'm going to pull it up with you all right now. And we'll see how we do here. All right, let's zoom in on this, make it a lot easier for you all to read. Oh, that should be nice and easy to read, huh? Okay, so we are looking at, again, this is chapter 18, the first of two instances, chapter 18 of Leviticus. I'm going to just read through most of it. You can see I've broken it up a little bit, and we'll get a sense of really what's going on here. So, Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, I am Adonai. I, Adonai, am your God. You shall not copy the practices of the land of Egypt where you dwelt, or of the land of Canaan to which I am taking you, nor shall you follow their laws. My rules alone shall you observe, and faithfully follow my laws. I, Adonai, am your God. You shall keep my laws and my rules, by the pursuit of which man shall live. I am Adonai." Okay, so what are some of those practices of Egypt and Canaan? Incest and adultery. This is the first section here. "None of you shall come near any one of his own flesh to uncover nakedness. I am Adonai. Your father's nakedness, that is the nakedness of your mother, you shall not uncover. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. Do not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is the nakedness of your father." This, by the way, is not necessarily your mother. This would be your father's other wives, right? Any of the other wives, because we're talking about a polygamous culture in the time of the Torah. The nakedness of your sister, your father's daughter, or your mother's. Right? What does that mean? Either you are whole sisters or half sisters. You just share a father and another mother. Whether born into the household or outside, meaning she's legitimate, or she could be an illegitimate sister from a concubine or whatever else, right? Do not uncover their nakedness. The nakedness of your son's daughter or of your daughter's daughter. Do not uncover their nakedness, for their nakedness is yours. The nakedness of your father's wife's daughter, who is born into your father's household. She is your sister. Do not uncover her nakedness. This would be your half sister. Do not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister. She is your father's flesh, your aunt. Do not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, for she is your mother's flesh. Do not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother, right? Meaning, do not approach his wife. She is your aunt. Do not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You shall not uncover her nakedness. Do not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. It is the nakedness of your brother. Right. So you can see the category I gave here is incest/adultery, because it's not solely incest. Anybody have a sense of why it's not solely incest? Hands raised. Okay. Yes, Catherine?
Because some of the folks named in this list are not your actual relatives.
Right. And the issue here with them is that they are the nakedness of your relative. Right? So uncle's wife, you have no connection to her whatsoever, right?
Except maybe through Adam and Eve,
Relative.
Sorry.
In that case, right, she is your right? You would be committing adultery because she is the wife of another person. In this case, the person happens to be your uncle. Right? So that's why I have this category kind of split between the two. Let's go on and see what the next category is. Oh, hold on. Sorry.
Rabbi,
Yep.
how is adultery defined? In other words, is it having a sexual relationship with another married woman? And if that woman is not married, it's okay? Or or is it just having sexual relationships
Adultery, a man having sexual relations with another man's wife. Right? It really doesn't have anything to do with the woman so much. I mean, it does, but it's more about the fact that it's another man's wife. A woman, like a man who's married to a woman and having relations with another woman who's single, it's not adultery. It's not problematic according to the Torah. We may have different opinions in the last centuries, but according to the Torah, that is not prohibited. In fact, you may actually have certain obligations. There's an interesting argument of whether or not polygamy is good or bad, right? That the insistence on monogamy gives rise to extramarital affairs. And if you didn't have that, you would have polygamy, or you could have group marriage or whatever else. So not really trying to pass judgment one way or the other, but just according to the Torah, the definition of adultery is a man having sexual relations with another man's wife. So, yeah. Okay, so the next category we have here is, there you go, maternal. I'm going to change this. Maternal / sororal polygyny, because those are phrases we know so well. All right, so polygyny is going to be a man with multiple wives. Like polygamy is just the idea of one person having multiple partners. It could be male or female. Like polyandry would be one woman, multiple husbands. Polygyny is one man, multiple wives. So maternal or sororal polygyny is going to be marriage to two women who are related to one another. So do not uncover the nakedness of a woman and her daughter, nor shall you marry her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter, so when her granddaughter, and uncover her nakedness. They are kindred. It is depravity. Do not marry a woman as a rival to her sister and cover her nakedness in the other's lifetime. So that last little bit there, the chayeha, in her lifetime, that's important, because then what you have is kind of a rivalry between two sisters with a shared husband. But if one sister were to die, right, your wife were to die, and then you were to go ahead and marry her sister, and no problem according to the Torah. This may raise a red flag and say, but wait a second, didn't Jacob marry both Rachel and Leah? Yes, but that was before the Torah, so it's okay. It's irrelevant. It's a moot point. Besides, there weren't many Jews at that time, so we have 600,000 men at this point, so a lot more people to be worried about. Okay, continuing on. Menstrual relations. Do not come near a woman during her period of uncleanliness to uncover her nakedness. Do not have carnal relations with your neighbor's wife and defile yourself with her. This is just a blanket rule of adultery. Kind of related to the incestuous adultery we saw before, but this is just plain adultery. Molech worship. Do not allow any of your offspring to be offered up to Molech, and do not profane the name of your God. I am Adonai. Homosexual relations. Do not lie with a male as one lies with a woman. It is an abhorrence. And the word here is toeva. Toeva. If you'll recall the word toeva, we're going to focus on that word in a little bit. Bestiality. Do not have carnal relations with any beast and defile yourself thereby. And let no woman lend herself to a beast to mate with it. It is perversion. And here the word is tevel. Right? Finally, this is just the little concluding lines. Do not defile yourself in any of these ways, for it is by such the nations that I am casting up before you defiled themselves. Thus the land became defiled, and I called it into account for its iniquity. And the land spewed out its inhabitants. But you must keep my laws and my rules, and you must not do any of those abhorrent things, neither the citizen nor the stranger who resides among you. For all those abhorrent things were done by the people who were in the land before you, and the land became defiled. So let not the land spew you out for defiling it, as it spewed out the nation that came before you. All who do any of those abhorrent things, such persons shall be cut off from their people. You shall keep my charge not to engage in any of the abhorrent practices that were carried on before you, and you shall not defile yourselves through them. I, Adonai, am your God. There you go. So, any thoughts, comments, questions about anything that we just saw here? Yeah, Phil.
Well, it seems like this is pretty highly evolved for the time. I mean, the assumption is that a lot of this was happening in Egypt, where the Hebrews came from, and this is quite an evolution of, or a more sophisticated and I would argue, more civilized sexual restrictions, sexual order. Pretty much trying to clarify what's going to work in what's going to keep our society somewhat orderly, because we're going to do it differently. We have a different moral code, and that's pretty amazing considering the time this was introduced.
So I want to pick up a couple of words that you just used in your description. One is it's more civilized, and the other moral code. Again, I don't necessarily know if you can say if you could necessarily apply those words, right? Without, because really all those words I think are passing judgment that we've seen in other ancient societies where some of these things did occur and was not necessarily problematic, but it's definitely a more rigid society around structural norms and mores, right? That there's definitely a lot more limitations that are placed compared to either the people of Egypt or the people of Canaan. That is definitely clear from this. Is it more moral? Possibly, don't know. Is it more civilized? Again, let's see. But it's definitely a much more rigid set of guiding principles. One thing you might notice, though, is here it says you can't do all this, but what is missing? Yeah, Catherine?
One's own daughter. It's not in the list.
It's not on the list?
Not in the list. I don't see it in the list.
Hold on, let's go back up to that. Just take a quick look.
Well, unless you want to count it as the daughter of your wife, who would be your own daughter, but your own daughter is not in the list.
Well, actually, yeah, it is actually, I think it is covered by this maternal polygyny, right? Did not uncover the nakedness of a woman and her daughter. So if
okay, but that's kind of sliding it by.
I would not disagree with you,
Okay.
but one could possibly argue that that is going to be part of that, and also the idea of the nakedness of your son's daughter, of your daughter's daughter. I think one could then assume. I think maybe just such a general assumption. You don't do this. I don't know, that it didn't have to be mentioned. Maybe it was not the practice of any of those peoples, of the Egyptians or of the Canaanites, to uncover the nakedness of their daughters. Therefore, didn't have to be part of the list. We'll see. But actually, the one thing I want to point out, though, was that there's no punishment here. It just says don't do it. And why not? Because I am Adonai, right? You don't want the land to spit you out. You don't want to defile the land, but there's no actual punishment that's here. So, which is why we then come to chapter 20. Chapter 20 is very repetitive. It's it's redundant in a way. It's telling us almost the exact same things, different order. However, here it actually has punishments listed. So let's see what it has to say here. And Adonai spoke to, yes, Phil.
So what can you do? I mean, in other words, it's telling you all the things you can do. Basically saying you must be monogamous, or if you're in a polygamous race, if you have several wives, you must be 1 to 1 to 1 to 1. It's basically, that's understood. That's why it's set up that way, but you're not to go outside of that family unit. Is that what would have been said if God could have said, this is what you can do?
No, the whole point is that you do go outside of your family unit, right? That if you want to marry one woman, okay, she cannot come from anywhere within your family, within your tribe, within your clan, right? So you have to go outside, and it's a way of really creating a tighter knit society amongst all the different clans instead of having insular communities, right? And what it's really doing is it's creating a greater sense of Am Yisrael, because everybody is very much interconnected. And if you have 10 children or more, right, then you're really, mixing and mingling a whole bunch, right?
I understand that, but when you go outside of, oh, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, like, you could have 4 sons who are all married to 4 daughters, right, and connect the tribes that way. But right, that one son can't marry multiples of sisters, right? So
I understand that, but that's not really what I was talking about. Once you do marry that woman outside of your clan from another tribe, you have to maintain that relationship exclusively, except with unmarried women of, it seems like that's another key. This is what you can do, or what you should do. I'm going to find the.
So according to the Torah, you can have as many wives as you want, right? But when you are choosing those wives or concubines or whatever it might be, they cannot fall under these restrictions, right? Then it's forbidden. But other than that, okay, gesund, go and have as many wives, as many partners as you want. All right. So now here we are, chapter 20. And Adonai spoke to Moses, say further to the Israelite people, anyone among the Israelites or among these strangers residing in Israel, sorry, one second, looks like someone's trying to join us. All right. So it says, anyone amongst the Israelites or among the strangers of Israel residing in Israel, who gives any of his offspring to Molech, shall be put to death. The people of the land shall pelt him with stones. And I will set my face against that man and will cut him off from among his peoples, because he gave of his offspring to Molech, and so defiled my sanctuary and profaned my holy name. And if the people of the land should shut their eyes to that man when he gives of his offspring to Molech, and should not put him to death, I myself will set my face against that man and his kin, and I will cut off from among the people both him and all who follow him in going astray after Molech. So here we have this idea of Molech worship. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a little bit, but same thing that we had before. It's actually but more verses than we had the first time. Here, though, we actually have a punishment, death. And not just that, but we also have the idea of karet, of a person being cut off. Normally, we understand karet as a death penalty. However, it's interesting here that we are distinguishing between mita, death, or mavet, right, as death, versus karet. And anybody who assists or turns a blind eye to the person who performs Molech worship, the punishment for them is karet. However we define that. However, it's clear that the person who actually offers up their child to Molech is put to death. Okay, so here we have a little, potpourri category. And if any person turns to ghosts and familiar spirits and goes astray after them, I will set my face against that person and cut him off amongst his people. You shall sanctify yourself and be holy, for I, Adonai, am your God. You shall faithfully observe my laws. I, Adonai, make you holy. If anyone insults his father or his mother, he shall be put to death. He has insulted his father and his mother. His blood guilt is upon him. Okay, that's a little random bit. I want to set that aside. I believe it does not belong at all in this section, and you'll see why in a little bit. Here you go back to adultery. If a man commits adultery with a married woman, committing adultery with another man's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall be put to death. Death. Incest. If a man lies with his father's wife, it is the nakedness of his father that he has uncovered. The two shall be put to death. Their blood guilt is upon them. If a man lies with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall be put to death. They have committed incest. Their blood guilt is upon them. Homosexual relations. If a man lies with a male as one lies with a woman, the two of them have done an abhorrent thing. They shall be put to death. Their blood guilt is upon them. Incest, maternal polygyny. If a man marries a woman and her mother, it is depravity. Both he and they shall be put to the fire, that there be no depravity among you. So here we have all three are put to death. If a man has carnal relations with a beast, he shall be put to death, and you shall kill the beast. Oh, poor animal. If a woman approaches any beast to mate with it, you shall kill the woman and the beast. They shall be put to death. Their blood guilt is upon them. Incest. If a man marries his sister, the daughter of either his father or his mother, so that he sees her nakedness and she sees his nakedness, it is a disgrace. They shall be excommunicated in the sight of their kinfolk. He has uncovered the nakedness of his sister. He shall bear his guilt. So interestingly, right, if you have your sister, here the punishment is not death, it's excommunication. All right, it's karet. Again, karet may be death, but it's definitely being cut off from your people. So, all right, menstrual relations. If a man lies with a woman in her infirmity and uncovers her nakedness, he has laid bare her flow and she has exposed her blood flow. Both of them shall be cut off from among their people. Again, karet, not mita or mavet. Incest, adultery. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister or your father's sister, for that is laying bare one's own flesh. They shall bear their guilt. If a man lies with his uncle's wife, it is his uncle's nakedness that he has uncovered. They shall bear their guilt. They shall die childless. Again, punishment is not necessary. Question is, are they permitted to live and they just die childless? Or is it they have to both be killed and even before a child can come into being? Right? That is a question the rabbis discuss. If a man marries the wife of his brother, it is indecency. It is the nakedness of his brother that he has uncovered. They shall remain childless. You shall faithfully observe all my laws and all my regulations, lest the land to which I bring you to settle and spew you out. You shall not follow the practices of the nation that I'm driving out before you, for it is because they did all these things that I abhorred them, and said to you, you shall possess their land, for I will give it to you to possess, the land flowing with milk and honey. I, Adonai, am your God, who has set you apart for all other peoples. Okay. Yes, Phil.
I don't understand why child sacrifice would be in this section of the Torah either. That's another thing. You're talking about the forbidden sexual relations, and all of a sudden you throw in, and if you sacrifice, I'm assuming they're talking about child sacrifice when they say if you
hang tight, and let's see if we can get to address your question. Let's see. Okay. Any other questions or issues or comments or anything what we just saw here?
Hey, so one of the things I was studying last night. Hi, everybody. You don't know me. I'm in Arizona. I've known your rabbi for a long time.
25 years.
Yes, a lot of years. Trekked through the desert of Israel with him. I kind of found it interesting, I think it was in Numbers, one of the later books, in talking about adultery, that if the woman isn't caught, then she has to go before the tabernacle. So there's sort of like these rules, which are pre-tabernacle, and then there's other rules that are post-tabernacle. Am I interpreting that correct?
So yes and no, Aaron. I'm going to mute you again. So the difference is really going to be something where there is a witness versus there not being a witness. So there's nobody who actually can say, I saw them having an affair with one another. There's no way to prove it. And so the idea is that if a husband is suspicious, they want to have some sort of process in place to be able to prove. However, you're never going to actually be able to prove it. And you go through this whole ritual of the sota ritual, the woman having to drink this water, and the idea that her belly will distend and her labia will distend as well. It's like, is anything that's actually going to happen? No. More than anything else, it's one, to scare somebody into fessing up if in fact they did do something. Two, it's also to make the husband, it's a horrible thing to say, right? But to make the husband feel a bit better, right? That it gives him a way to be able to kind of move on from there, right? He's holding on to the suspicion, and that can lead to possibly a far worse situation for the woman, right? Who knows what it could lead to, right? But if the Kohanim now say, God has found that she is not guilty of it, right? And because she insists on her innocence and that she goes through this whole process because of that, then they're saying, God found that she is innocent. You cannot do anything to her. Now, of course, afterwards, they're supposed to just continue going on through marriage as if everything was all fine and dandy. And right, she does actually have the option of divorcing him if she doesn't feel safe, if she, for whatever reasons, the tradition does permit that. But this is saying, like, if you actually have actual proof, we can actually, we know that this has happened, right? Now we actually have some punishments here. Okay. So any other questions or anything, any points before we move on here? Yes, Catherine.
You commented a little bit ago that in the first section of rules that we read, there was no punishment, but that section concluded with the land spewing you out if you do these things. That certainly sounds like punishment to me.
Right. So, and I said that as well, right? The difference being there is the difference between collective versus individual punishment, right? The collective is if all of society behaves in such a way, the land's going to spew you out. The individual is if you do this, right, then this is what's going to happen to you individually. But I want to go a little bit closer and kind of zoom out because there's so much text here that we've looked at. I want to kind of break it down a little bit to make it more digestible. So, of course, we have a nice little chart because that's what I do. I love charts. So here we have the category of what the transgression is, a brief description of what it is, if there's a punishment, and then I'll talk about these two categories in a moment. So incest, this would be with your sister.
I'm not seeing the chart. It's not coming up on my screen.
Oh, it's not coming up? Oh, give me 1 second. I'm going to reshare this way. Now is it there? Okay, excellent. So we have the transgression, description, punishment, and then I'll talk about these two categories in just a moment. So we have the sin of transgression of incest, and I realize it wasn't explicitly stated, but this could be sister, and everything else is explicitly stated. Half sister, your mother, your aunt, which would be a parent's sister, right? A daughter, niece, sibling's daughter, right? And your granddaughter. Those parentheses are somewhat important for the definition of incest. Then we have adultery, another's wife, your mother, because she's your father's wife. It's both incest, but it's also adultery. Your stepmother, father's wife, right? Sister-in-law, brother's wife, right? Aunt, uncle's wife, daughter-in-law, your son's wife, sister-in-law, brother's wife. All these are wives. And here actually, some cases it's put to death, but it's actually more explicitly childless. They shall die childless. It's questionable. Are they put to death and they don't have children, or are they allowed to live? I would actually argue this is going to be put to death because we know that if you have relations with another's wife, you're put to death. Because everybody else here is another person's wife, it would stand to reason that in that case too, they are put to death. So punishment is death. Maternal or sororal polygyny, a woman and her daughter, a woman and her granddaughter, right? Everybody's put to death. Menstrual relations, right? That's pretty self-explanatory. So punishment is karet, cut off. Homosexual relations, the act itself. By the way, this is the act itself between two men. It's not necessarily a relationship, and it's also not the act between two women. This is a man laying with another man. Both are put to death. Bestiality, the sexual act between man, right? Person and animal both put to death. And then molech worship. So this is the different commentaries that the rabbis give us. It could be literal sacrifice of a child in fire, right? The actual child sacrifice. It could be the dedication of a child to pagan priests and of priests of a temple of Molech. Molech was a god. And there the idea is there could be fire, that maybe it's the child has to walk through the fire, and if they live, whatever, or it could be they have to walk between two pillars of fire, and that's just a symbol like you're actually walking through it. So not entirely clear. It could also be, this final one, spilling the seed during sexual relations as a form of worship, saying, right, there's a difference between spilling seed for the sake of just pleasure between a husband and wife. You don't want to have
You froze, Rabbi. Your screen froze.
You can't see any of this?
And your screen froze.
Kevin, you can see it? All right. All right. I think it might be you, Phil. I don't know. But this Molech worship, this idea could also be spilling of seed in the sexual act. If it's between husband and wife, just because for the sake of Shalom Bayit, there are a lot of sexual acts which are permitted between a husband and wife. If it's for the sake of arousal and pleasure between husband and wife for the sake of what's Shalom Bayit, of peace within the home. But if it's done as an act of, for the sake of like offering something up to this god, to this pagan god of Molech, then that would be prohibited. All three ideas are codified in the commentaries. Right? And what happens here? The father is put to death, and all who are complicit receive karet. Okay. So Phil, you raised the question before. Why is child worship in this group? Actually, before I even answer that question, let me go a little bit further. I want to look at these two last columns. Mutually agreeable. The question there is, are the two parties who are directly involved, right? Is there consent between the two parties? Like, are they happy to be doing this, right? And then someone harmed, like, is there a party that's wronged as a result of this? Is the question here. So with incest, yes, it's quite likely that the two parties are, consent to the relationship. However, someone's going to be harmed. And most likely the party that's going to be harmed, if there's no marriage involved, where it doesn't really fall under the idea of adultery, the party that's going to be harmed is going to be the child. Because we know that children that result from incest tend to present different developmental disorders, right, or needs. So right, that can be a detriment to the child that results from it. So the idea here is that if someone is harmed, it should only, an act, what I want to argue here is that an act should only be permissible nowadays if, well, hold on a second. Let's just look at this for a second. Okay. Adultery. Yes, both parties may agree to it, but definitely the partner of the woman is definitely wronged and harmed in the encounter. Maternal sororal polygyny, again, there can be agreement between each partners, like the partners individually, but there definitely can be emotional turmoil between the mother and daughter or sisters, right? So again, problematic. Menstrual relations can definitely be mutually consensual. And then, is anybody harmed? Not really. A child may not necessarily result, but nobody is actually harmed from that. Homosexual relations, is it consensual? Yes. Is anybody harmed? Again, no. There is the idea of there not being a child resulting from the relations, but nobody's actually harmed or wronged from that. Bestiality, is it consensual? No. Is anybody harmed? Not necessarily. And Molech worship, is it consensual? Does the child agree to be sacrificed? Probably not. The child probably would not want that to happen. And is somebody harmed? Yes, the child is harmed. Okay. So here, yeah. So going back to your original question, Phil, about why is this Molech worship here? My belief, my argument, is that this entire section of incest and like adultery, all this stands in stark contrast to the very first mitzvah in the entire Torah of pru urvu, to be fruitful and to multiply. And in fact, we see the punishment listed in chapter 20 for some of these is to be childless, right? So the idea of having children is the goal, and the punishment would be not to have children. So what happens there? So if you have incest, right? And so the idea of pru urvu, if expand the family, or really it should be this way. If you want to expand the family tree, right, incest will keep the family tree linear. It may even shrink the family tree. Who knows? Adultery may expand one person's family tree, but you actually prevent another person's family tree from growing. Maternal sororal polygyny, again, this is going to be like incest. It keeps it linear. Menstrual relations, if the only time, right, according to the Torah, the only time you would ever have sex would be during menstrual relations, right? It completely cuts off the family tree. We actually know that one can get pregnant during menstruation, right? It's not that exact period of time where there has to be concern of where you can't get pregnant, but right, they had a more simplistic understanding. So the idea behind the Torah would be at that point in time, it's cutting off entirely. Homosexual relations as well, you're cutting off the family tree entirely, not expanding. Bestiality, same thing, you're cutting off the family tree. And Molech worship, you are narrowing the family tree, maybe cutting off entirely or narrowing it down. So everything here goes against the commandment to be fruitful and to multiply. Make sense? We're all following so far? Yes, okay. So my argument would be that what if there were a way to still have an increase of the family tree, a widening, broadening of the family tree within this framework, right? The only way that could be permissible would be if it's mutually agreed upon and there's no party that's harmed, right? So mutually agreed upon, yeah, like a lot of these are mutually agreeable, right? Bestiality, no, it's not mutually agreeable. There's no consent there from the animal. Same with child sacrifice. Therefore, those will never be permissible. But all these other ones are mutually agreeable. So then we have to look to see, is anybody wronged? In these cases, incest, adultery, polygyny, the maternal sororal polygyny, there are people who are wronged or harmed. Menstrual relations and homosexual relations are the only two places where it's consensual and no parties are harmed. So what do we do with that? So here's the thing. In the time of the Torah, there was no concept of adoption. You could take on the responsibility to care for somebody else's child and make them your own liability, but you didn't actually adopt them as your own, right? Even if you took them on to like provide for them, if their biological parent were to die, they would still have to sit shiva and mourn for their parent right, the way that they would otherwise. It's not until more recent centuries that, and actually really in the more recent probably century or two, that we have this idea of adoption. But even the adoption, as we understand it today, really you are the child, like you are taking on responsibility for the child. Right. Oh, I'll just pause there. You're still taking on the responsibility for the child. The idea of adoption of a non-Jewish child is an extremely modern idea. Like that's in the last 100 to 200 years. And that being the case, you take the child in as your own. They don't have obligations to their biological parents. You are as if you are their parent. But what they do is they go through a conversion. And so you're bringing them into the Jewish community. The first time we actually see even the idea of conversion in the Torah, in the Tanakh, is the story of Ruth, right, where she decides she wants to be like the rest of, like wants to be with Naomi and all that, right? But in the time of the Torah, there's definitely no idea of even conversion. If somebody's an outsider, they just are an outsider. So if the entire point of Pru or Vu is to expand the Jewish family tree, you can't do that. So, but here we have, oh, we lost Catherine. But here we have this idea of what if you can actually do that? So nowadays we have conversion and we have the adoption, which enables us to be able to grow the Jewish family tree. So then we come back to the question of menstrual relation and homosexual relation. Menstrual relation, again, we know that technically you can still conceive during menstruation. So one could argue that there's no reason for this to be prohibited. Obviously it's not put to death, but either way, one could make the argument that karet doesn't even need to be applied here. The other situation we have would be homosexual relations. Again, two men could adopt, and they can adopt a non-Jewish child, and that child is converted into Judaism, and they raise them as their own child. They are still expanding the Jewish family tree. They are able to fulfill this mitzvah of pru urvu on behalf of the larger Jewish community. It's consensual, nobody's harmed, and then they can actually still expand the family tree. So my argument would be that if we look at these two chapters, chapter 18 and chapter 20 together, which for centuries, millennia, have really harmed a number of people who are homosexual, then maybe it's worth actually looking again closer at the text to understand exactly what's going on. Problem with this approach, the one major flaw in this approach, though, is that no earlier rabbis in the times of midrashic writing came to this conclusion, and we cannot create our own midrash and kind of interpret the Torah however we want. We can only go as far back as the Talmud to be able to understand their interpretation of things, to be able to reinterpret. So we put
You
our
froze again, Rabbi. Your picture is totally frozen.
Kevin,
Sorry.
I'm not frozen. All right, so Phil, I think it might be you. The
Okay.
other saying that they can still say. All right, so what we have here then is we're kind of stuck. Right? The Talmud and Halakha limits our ability to be able to interpret this way. However, right, I would make the argument that maybe there's a way to be able to go even deeper into this. I have not yet done further research to figure out what we can do. However, just as today people might find this unappealing, menstrual relations, but nobody is going to pass judgment or say somebody should be killed. Nobody is standing outside of schools or other institutions with signs saying God hates people who have sex during period, right? Just like they have signs say God hates fags, right? Right. Thank you, Westboro Church. That's one of the good benefits of quarantine. I guess we don't hear about them going out and protesting in front of places, so that's good. But right, so just as people don't have a real issue with others doing this, right, then there really shouldn't be an issue with this either. So again, it's difficult for us to change halakha entirely, which is why the conservative movement's position is that the Torah specifically limits, restricts the act itself, but not the relationship. And then the conservative movement goes on to say, and just as we do not go into the bedroom of heterosexual couples to ask them what they're doing in their bedrooms, so too we would not go into the bedrooms of homosexual couples and ask them what they're doing in the bedroom. It's not our business. Let's just stay out of it. And just kind of, which I think is a bit of a cop-out, but with our hands kind of tied, without more advanced kind of halachic reasoning, this is kind of where we find ourselves stuck. But again, not many, I've never heard of others who are interpreting this text in this way. And my hope is that we'll get more people to see this, and maybe this will at some point get us to rethink the position on the prohibition of homosexuality within Judaism, to make it less apologetic as it currently stands, and really more celebratory and inclusive, the way that I think it actually could be if we were to understand the text differently. And Catherine, you just missed the thrust of my argument at the very end here, but the good news is that it is going to be on Facebook, and you'll be able to replay it there as well. But any questions with all of the stuff that we have here? Of course. Yeah, Phil. Phil, you have to unmute yourself. Phil, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, I got it. Okay. as we learn more, as we evolve as a society, isn't it a living Torah? I mean, that's one of my questions. And if it is a living Torah that has to deal with things as we've now learned they are, that, well, we have a different perception of them. Why wouldn't the halacha be able to, why couldn't you just interpret, say that was fine for then, but it does not apply for now. We are going to, we definitely are going to evolve in our interpretation and be inclusive, totally, not apologetically inclusive, but proactively inclusive. And,
Yeah. So
it's a bit confusing as to why we can't do that in the conservative movement.
Right. So your point just reminded me of another point that I actually wanted to make, which was Professor Richard Elliott Friedman, or Dick Friedman. He wrote the book Who Wrote the Bible. A lot of people understand him as kind of like a pop biblical critic, biblical scholar, because he writes popular books about the topic, but he actually is really wonderful, a brilliant mind. And I heard him present at Limud in the UK, I don't know, maybe 7 years ago now at this point. And his argument was actually based on the word to'eva that we saw before. To'eva being an abhorrent thing or an abomination, as it's often translated. And he pointed out that the word to'eva is not a blanket prohibition, but he's saying it's actually culturally abhorrent. So we remember when Joseph is down in Egypt and his brothers come down and join him, Joseph says to his brothers, don't tell Pharaoh that you are shepherds because it's a to'eva, right? It's abhorrent. In Egyptian society, where they worship, right, the lamb, it would be, where they worship sheep, right, it would be an important thing to say they are shepherds. But in the land of Canaan, where they came from, it was not an important thing, it was not a to'eva, which is why they did it. So in the culture of Egyptian society, that is an abomination. That's a to'eva. And so therefore, Richard Friedman would argue that looking at the word to'eva in this context, specifically with the homosexual relations, that is a culturally abhorrent thing. And we're talking about a culture 3,200 years ago when the Torah was received. And even if we want to go crazy and be a real biblical critic and say it's not until maybe the time of in the Babylonian exile that the Torah is really codified, great, let's go there. That still is like 2,600 years ago, 2,500 years ago. So still, culturally, we are very separated from that time. And so if we're looking at these culturally abhorrent things, again, it's not a blanket statement that it should be abhorrent for all time in all places, but in that one context. We may also argue that it could be contextual with just the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, where you're going, where the people practice these things, as God says in the Torah. There are other places in the Torah where we're supposed to do things when we go into the land that the rabbis say, oh, it only applies to the land of Israel, not anywhere else. So again, maybe it shouldn't be relevant if you are outside of the land of Israel, right? So the homosexual act itself in the land of Israel should not be permitted, but everywhere else it should be fine, right? Could be another way to understand it. Lots of different ways, I think, to understand it. But I think if you take that in combination with the idea of the being able to be fruitful and multiply, and how there's consent, nobody is harmed, right? There was no concept of non-Jewish adoption, and now there is. There was no idea of even conversion prior, and now there is. I think it gives us a lot of ground to stand on to say, let's rethink what's going on here. So, any other questions or comments on all this? No? All right. Then I want to, yep, Phil?
I'm sorry. I just, but when it's the life of your people, the continuation of the life of your people, that trumps all of this, right? I mean, for instance, the two daughters that had sexual relations with their father, which I forget exactly what parsha that was in, What?
That was with Lot.
Is that the only instance that we find where there's an incestuous relationship done specifically so that the people shall be able to continue as a people and not be cut off at that point?
But still, that was 500 years before this, right? Almost 500 years before what we're looking at right here. So
This is an interesting point, that knowing this had happened before, and it was because for the continuation of the Hebrews as a people that it had to happen. They were in a that there should be areas that trump these rules. I mean, there should be something so important that it trumps these rules, or maybe not. I don't know. I was just.
So there's a concept of sha'at achak, of a pressing time. But literally that would have to be, we are the last two people on earth. And there's the survival of the species depends on this brother and sister, or like, right? That would be the only way that you can say, right, this has to be done. Otherwise, there's always going to be some other option. Right? Yes, Catherine.
Well, we have to remember in this, by the way, let me apologize. I had to go away for a few minutes and I think I missed some really interesting discussion. But anyway, let's remember too, Phil, that Abraham and Sarah were half brother, half sister.
Yep.
And
Yocheved and Amram were
they're on the list that we just read, so what do we do with that?
And also Yocheved and Amram were aunt and nephew, right?
Right.
Right. So.
And there was a time in not too long ago, especially in Eastern Europe, as I understand it, when it was not uncommon for uncles to marry their nieces and other such, what we would regard, probably anyway, as inappropriate consanguineous, I don't think I said that word right, relationships that, were fairly common and accepted.
The other aspect that kind of ties into this, Catherine, is also the financial implications, right? If you were talking about the daughter of your uncle, for instance, which is not prohibited by the Torah here. Bye, Kevin. Nice seeing you. It would be that you're taking money from your uncle, right? Or like you're buying her from your uncle, but she comes with a bride price as well. You're kind of keeping the financial exchange within the family, which maybe sometimes is okay, but isn't also better to be able to kind of share amongst the different people. But if you're doing it within your own family, immediately within your own family, well, where does that money actually go? It becomes quite convoluted. So all right, I'm going to leave it there. I've got another meeting to get to, but it's nice learning with you all. Thank you for joining me, and we'll talk soon. We'll do some more learning soon. All the best.